The moment the cafe door opened, everything in that bright, modern room seemed to freeze, as if time itself was holding its breath. Sunlight spilled across polished tables. Cups clinked softly in the background. And then, unexpectedly, she stepped inside with a small child on her hip. In that single heartbeat, a blind date meant to be simple turned into something no one had planned for, something that would quietly change 3 lives forever. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that love often arrives in the most unplanned ways, take a second right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this only reach hearts because people like you believe they matter. Her name was Rachel Morrison, and she had almost turned back twice before entering that cafe in Denver, Colorado. The invitation for the blind date had come after months of encouragement from friends who insisted she deserved more than survival mode. Rachel was 29, exhausted in a way sleep never fixed, and carrying more responsibility than most people twice her age. Her daughter, Sophie, barely 3 years old, rested against her shoulder, a tiny pink bow clipped into curls that smelled faintly of baby shampoo. Rachel's arms were strong from years of lifting more than groceries. They carried grief, resilience, and a love fierce enough to keep going even when she felt invisible. The date had been set for noon, and Rachel was already late. Not because she was careless, but because Sophie had cried that morning, clinging tighter than usual, sensing her mother's nerves. The babysitter had canceled last minute, and the old familiar panic had crept in. Rachel had stared at her phone, fingers hovering over the screen, debating whether to cancel altogether. But something inside her, something tired of hiding and apologizing for existing, told her to go anyway. She adjusted her red dress, kissed Sophie's forehead, and walked in, knowing the choice she made in that moment might cost her whatever fragile chance she had left at happiness. Across the cafe sat Andrew Collins, 32, neatly dressed, hands folded around a cooling cup of coffee. He had arrived early, a habit formed from years of trying to control what little he could. Andrew was a widower, though most people didn't know that. His wife had died in a car accident 4 years earlier, leaving him with a hollow house and a heart that learned how to function without fully beating. He worked in construction management, lived quietly, and had only agreed to the blind date because his sister claimed he was disappearing into his routines. He expected awkward small talk, polite smiles, and an easy exit after an hour. What he did not expect was a woman walking in with a child. Heads turned. Whispers floated. Some people smiled sympathetically. Others judged silently. Rachel felt every stare like a weight pressing into her back. Her chest tightened, not from shame, but from the familiar fear of being dismissed before she was understood. She spotted Andrew easily, matching the description she'd been given, and for a brief moment, she considered walking straight past him and out the door. But Sophie shifted, her small fingers curling into Rachel's shoulder, grounding her. Rachel walked forward. Andrew looked up, and the surprise on his face was immediate and undeniable. His posture stiffened, his eyes flicked briefly to the child, then back to Rachel. The silence between them stretched longer than it should have. In that pause lived every assumption Rachel had ever been forced to endure, that she was too much, that her life was inconvenient, that her story scared people away before they heard it. Rachel braced herself for disappointment. She had rehearsed explanations in her head 100 times, but in that moment, none of them felt strong enough. She prepared for the polite smile, the awkward excuse, the inevitable ending before it began. But Andrew didn't stand up to leave. He didn't look annoyed or trapped. Instead, something softened in his expression, something unexpected and deeply human. He pushed his chair back slightly, not away from her, but to make space. Space for her, space for the child, space for a reality that wasn't tidy or predictable. They sat down together, Sophie perched carefully on Rachel's lap. The cafe noise faded into the background as Andrew listened, not just with his ears, but with his whole presence. Rachel spoke about being a single mother after Sophie's father disappeared. Before her daughter's first birthday, she spoke about working 2 jobs, about nights spent worrying more about formula than herself, about learning to be strong because there was no other option. She didn't dramatize her life. She simply told it as it was, raw and unpolished. Andrew absorbed every word. He noticed the way Rachel's hand never stopped gently rubbing Sophie's back, a quiet promise of safety. He noticed how Sophie watched him with curious eyes, unafraid. The shock everyone expected from him never arrived. Instead, memories stirred, of hospital hallways, of holding his wife's hand as machines beeped, of the way loss changes the shape of your future without asking permission. He understood, in a way that surprised even himself, that pain didn't make people weak. It made them real. Time passed unnoticed. Coffee went cold. Outside, clouds drifted lazily across the Colorado sky. Andrew spoke about his past, about learning how to sit with grief instead of running from it. He spoke about loneliness, not as something dramatic, but as something quiet and heavy. Rachel listened, truly listened, recognizing the same cracks she carried inside herself. Sophie grew restless, and Rachel felt embarrassment creep back in, apologizing through her actions as she adjusted her daughter. But Andrew leaned forward slightly, his attention gentle, his presence calm. For the first time in a long while, Rachel didn't feel like she had to shrink. When they finally stood to leave, the cafe felt different, as if something sacred had passed through unnoticed by everyone else. Andrew walked them to the door, sunlight catching the edges of their silhouettes. There was no promise, no grand declaration, just a shared understanding that something meaningful had begun. In the weeks that followed, they saw each other again, slowly, carefully. Andrew learned how to build Lego towers on the living room floor and how to listen to Sophie's laughter echo down hallways that once felt empty. Rachel learned what it felt like to be supported without conditions, to be seen as a woman and a mother without having to choose between the two. They didn't rush love. They let it grow in the quiet moments, in grocery store aisles, in bedtime routines, in shared silences that felt safe. People around them noticed the change. Rachel stood taller, smiled more freely. Andrew's home filled with warmth again, not as a replacement for what he lost, but as something new and honest. The shock that once lived in that cafe became a story of grace, of a man who chose compassion over assumption, and a woman who dared to show up as she was. Years later, Sophie would not remember that first blind date. She would only remember growing up in a home where love was patient, where broken beginnings were not hidden, and where kindness had rewritten what everyone thought was possible. If this story is touching something inside you right now, if it reminds you that love doesn't always come wrapped the way we expect, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and comment below. Your engagement helps stories like this reach hearts that are still waiting to believe again. And before this story ends, I want to ask you one special thing. Comment the word kindness if you believe that choosing empathy can change a life. Because sometimes all it takes to shock the world is not rejection, but understanding.